I was a professional pilot for a long time until I had a little bit of a health incident last year. Basically, I had a vein in my brain that started leaking, and well, long story short, I can't fly anymore.
Picture this. You're a successful corporate pilot, flying Gulfstreams to Caribbean vacation homes, living the dream. Then one morning, everything changes. You wake up, can't read your phone, and realize you're having a stroke. Your career? Gone in an instant. For Bobby White, creator of Sailing Doodles, this nightmare became his new beginning. But behind the idyllic sailing vlogs and tropical sunsets lies a story of heartbreak, loss, and survival that most viewers never see. The stroke that changed everything. September 2015 started like any other morning, until Bobby White's life stopped cold. The Dallas native had spent 2 decades building a successful career as a corporate pilot, traveling the world and making excellent money. He'd spent 4 years in Nigeria, another in Dubai, and had recently returned to Texas, where he flew private Gulfstreams for a wealthy family. That morning, Bobby woke up with a severe headache. Like many of us would, he reached for some ibuprofen and tried to push through. But here's the terrifying part. He was actually taking a blood thinner while having a brain bleed. When he picked up his phone to text his girlfriend, Bobby realized something was very wrong. He couldn't read. The words on the screen were just meaningless symbols. Somehow, Bobby managed to drive himself to an urgent care facility. They immediately rushed him to a hospital where a CAT scan revealed the truth. He'd suffered a hemorrhagic stroke. In one moment, Bobby's entire life changed. His pilot's license? Revoked. His career flying jets around the world? Over. At 38 years old, he had to relearn how to read. The first 3 months after a stroke are absolutely critical for recovery. Doctors told Bobby he needed to be proactive during this window, or he wouldn't recover much beyond those initial months. The pressure was immense. Bobby threw himself into rehabilitation, working tirelessly to regain his reading ability and rebuild his life. But what do you do when the career you've spent 20 years building is suddenly impossible? Bobby's mother, a successful realtor, suggested he try real estate. He gave it 8 months. In Bobby's own words, it was the most stressful job I ever had. Real estate wasn't the answer. So what was Bobby supposed to do with the rest of his life? The birth of Sailing Doodles. Bobby found his answer in an unexpected place, a podcast. He was listening to the Sailing podcast when Riley and Elena from Sailing La Vagabonde were interviewed. At the time, they had about 100,000 YouTube subscribers. Bobby had done some lake sailing before and had chartered boats in the Caribbean, so the concept wasn't completely foreign to him. Something clicked. If they could do it, why couldn't he? Bobby made a decision that would seem crazy to most people. He sold everything he owned except for a few clothes. He took the money and bought a 37-foot C&C sailboat built in 1984 for $24,000. He put another $4,000 into upgrades. Bobby named the boat Rough Seas after his 2 beloved Labradoodles, Maverick and Goose. These weren't small dogs we're talking about. They were 85-pound, full-sized Labradoodles. Bobby's plan was simple. Sail around the Caribbean for a year, document it on YouTube, and use that experience to get hired as crew on another boat. That was the extent of his ambition. He created the Sailing Doodles channel, named after his furry companions, and set sail from Galveston Bay with his friend Megan. The original goal was just to offset expenses. Within a month of buying Rough Seas, they were headed across the Gulf of Mexico. 7 days later, they reached the Florida Keys. But here's something Bobby learned quickly. Reality and expectations rarely match up when you're living on a sailboat. Bobby thought he had enough money to last a year in the Caribbean. How long did it actually last? The harsh reality hits 6 months. That's how long Bobby's carefully saved money lasted, instead of the planned year. Living on a sailboat, even an older, modest one, costs far more than most people expect. Marina fees, maintenance, fuel, food, equipment repairs, and endless surprise expenses quickly add up when the ocean is your address. Every week, Bobby posted videos to YouTube, gradually getting more comfortable with both sailing and content creation. The channel was beginning to cover his living costs, but only barely. This wasn't the carefree Caribbean fantasy people imagine. It was constant work, constant financial stress, and non-stop repairs just to keep rough seas afloat. Bobby sailed through the Bahamas and into the U.S. Virgin Islands, where a chance introduction changed everything. At a regatta in St. Thomas, a mutual friend connected him with Laura through Instagram. She was a traveling ICU nurse specializing in stroke patients, and she was struck by Bobby's refusal to let his injury sideline him. Instead of pity, she saw determination and resilience. By June 2017, Bobby had sailed rough seas to Puerto Rico. He accepted a job delivering a Lagoon 440 from St. Martin to Florida, hoping it would provide financial relief. His boat was even under contract to sell, which could have given him breathing room. Then, it collapsed. The buyer backed out at the last minute. Bobby was stranded in Puerto Rico with a boat he couldn't afford to keep sailing and no backup plan. But Bobby's troubles were just beginning. Nature had something far worse in store. Hurricane Maria, total devastation, September 2017. While Bobby was away delivering another boat, disaster was quietly lining up. Hurricane Maria was forming in the Atlantic. This wasn't just another tropical storm. Maria would become one of the most powerful and deadly hurricanes to ever strike the Caribbean. On September 20th, 2017, Hurricane Maria made landfall in Puerto Rico as a Category 4 hurricane, with winds of 155 miles per hour. It was the strongest storm to hit the island since 1928. The entire island was devastated. Communications were lost. The power grid was decimated. The NEXRAD Doppler weather radar was blown away. The radar dish itself, designed to withstand winds over 130 miles per hour, was torn from its pedestal. And Bobby's boat, Rough Seas, was sitting in Puerto Rico, right in the hurricane's path. When the storm passed, the damage was catastrophic. Rough Seas had been dismasted. The mast was broken. The hull had sustained considerable damage. The boat that Bobby had poured his savings into, the boat that represented his new life and dreams, was damaged practically beyond repair. Bobby had no choice. He ended up giving Rough Seas away. Just like that, his first chapter of Sailing Doodles was over. He had no boat, limited funds, and a YouTube channel that was just starting to gain traction. At this point, many people would have given up. They would have gone back to Texas, found a regular job, and called the sailing dream a youthful adventure. But Bobby wasn't ready to quit. How do you start over when you've lost everything? Bobby was about to find out. White Squall, a second chance. Bobby flew to Thailand in September 2017, considering turning Sailing Doodles into a travel blog instead of a sailing channel. One of his YouTube viewers suggested he talk with Ron Paxton of Gulf Charters. Bobby reached out and asked if he could interview Ron and tour his Island Spirit boat manufacturing company. That video received 50,000 views in the first few days, huge numbers for Bobby's channel at the time. More importantly, it led to an incredible opportunity. Gulf Charters had a 50-foot Beneteau called White Squall sitting in Vancouver for 3 years. Ron needed someone to sail it to Thailand for his charter fleet. The deal? Bring White Squall to Ocean Marina by the end of August 2018, and Bobby could use it for the journey. Bobby jumped on the boat on October 27, 2017. White Squall had just received a major retrofit and was ready for a long ocean crossing. Just 5 days before departure, Laura made a decision. She'd been burnt out from doing relief work in the Caribbean after the devastating hurricane season. She and Bobby hadn't seen each other since they first met in April, though he'd invited her to sail several times. Laura had been nursing in Alaska, but left to learn to sail and find a job in the Caribbean. The original plan was for her to be Sailing Doodles crew for just 2 months, then start nursing in Florida. Bobby left Vancouver Island on October 29th and picked up Laura in Bellingham, Washington on November 2nd. Laura's 2-month plan quickly changed. She fell in love with the sailing life. To fund the voyage and create content, Bobby and Laura opened up the crossing to their viewers. They rented out cabins on White Squall at a set rate per night, including meals. The guests were expected to help with night shifts and regular chores, but they got to be part of the Sailing Doodles adventure. The interest was incredible. By the time they reached Mexico, the channel was really picking up. They weren't just renting cabins, they were scheduling meet and greets along the route. People were starting to recognize them in stores and on docks. The deadline added pressure, but Gulf charters helped them chart their course. They sailed White Squall down the coast, across to Hawaii, through French Polynesia, Tuamotu, Bora Bora, Niue, Tonga, and Fiji. They spent time in Vanuatu, had a brutal 8-day journey to Papua New Guinea with rough seas and rough wind, then sailed through the Strait of Torres, off northern Australia, and through Indonesia. Bobby estimated they spent a third of their journey at sea. They sailed White Squall into port with little time to spare, completing their mission to Thailand. But success came with a hidden cost. What price were Bobby and Laura paying behind the scenes? The toll of content creation. What viewers didn't see was the exhausting reality of running a YouTube channel while sailing. Bobby was putting in 16-hour days, filming non-stop, editing for hours, and uploading whenever they could find a stable internet connection in remote locations. Every episode had to entertain, inform, and perform as the audience grew. With rising subscribers came sponsor expectations, deadlines, and pressure. This wasn't just sailing anymore. It was a full-time media operation run from a moving boat. Laura felt the strain too. Constant filming, little privacy, and the pressure to always be on took their toll. What began as an adventure slowly turned into a demanding job. After returning to the U.S., Bobby bought a 56-foot CT ketch named Naughty Dogs, excited for a fresh chapter. But the pressure cooker of non-stop travel, content creation, and life at sea proved too much. Bobby and Laura eventually split. Laura later married and is now a mother of 2. Her full name is Laura Peters, known on the channel as Laura Libra. Then, tragedy struck Bobby where it hurt most, losing Maverick. Maverick and Goose weren't just Bobby's dogs, they were the original Doodles. They were in the channel's name. They were there from the beginning, through the stroke recovery, through the decision to sell everything, through the first voyage on rough seas. These dogs were Bobby's loyal companions through every high and low. In early 2020, Maverick was diagnosed with cancer. It happened fast. Just a couple of weeks after the diagnosis, in February 2020, Maverick died at 9 years old. Bobby described Maverick as the most loyal animal or person I have ever known. When you watch the video Bobby made saying goodbye to Maverick, you can see the genuine heartbreak. There were many tears shed, Bobby admitted. This wasn't content. This was raw grief. Goose eventually went to live with Bobby's parents in Texas. The Doodles that started it all were gone. Goose would later pass away in 2022. Another emotional loss for Bobby and his family. Losing Maverick and Goose wasn't just about losing pets. It was losing the symbols of this entire journey, the companions who'd been there from the beginning of this crazy sailing adventure. But nature wasn't done testing Bobby's resolve. His worst disaster was still ahead. The night of the fire, November 15th, 2020. Bobby was single-handing Naughty Dogs off the Outer Banks of North Carolina. The conditions were brutal. Heavy seas with winds topping 40 knots. At night, in those conditions, sailing alone is already dangerous. Then came the catastrophic failure. The boat's transmission suffered a breakdown, and it caused a fire. Imagine being alone at night in 40-knot winds with flames spreading through your boat. Bobby's first instinct was to fight it. He grabbed fire extinguishers and tried to put out the flames. The smell of burning rubber filled the air. The boat was taking on water as the fire damaged critical systems. Bobby had to make the hardest call any sailor makes. He radioed the Coast Guard for rescue. The Coast Guard responded, but Bobby was still battling to keep Naughty Dogs afloat during the wait. The seas were rough. The wind was relentless. Smoke and flames made it hard to breathe and assess the damage. This was a life-or-death situation. When the Coast Guard finally reached him and got Bobby safely off the boat, the extent of the damage became clear. Naughty Dogs was burnt and taking on water. After inspection, the damage totaled over $100,000. Bobby had purchased Naughty Dogs in 2019. He'd barely owned it for a year before this disaster. Then came perhaps the worst news. Insurance refused to pay for the repairs. Bobby's biggest mistake, he later admitted, was not properly declaring the eastern U.S. as his sailing area with his insurance company. That technicality meant the insurance company wouldn't cover the $100,000 plus in damages. Bobby was faced with an impossible choice. He couldn't afford the repairs. He ended up selling Naughty Dogs to a Sailing Doodles patron. Once again, he was without a boat. For the third time, Bobby had lost his boat. How does someone keep going after 3 devastating setbacks? Resilience and community. This is where the Sailing Doodles story takes a turn. Bobby could have walked away. 3 boats lost, a painful breakup, the death of his dogs, financial strain, and non-stop content pressure. Any one of those would have ended the dream. Instead, he did something unexpected. Bobby released a 35-minute documentary about the fire and Coast Guard rescue, sharing the disaster in raw detail. He asked viewers to donate what they felt was fair, and the community responded. Sailors worldwide later said the video helped save their own boats by showing what to watch for in emergencies. Bobby turned trauma into something useful. He went on to buy a '97 Hatteras 60-foot motor yacht, the Dark Side, joking he'd crossed to power. Fans supported the shift. The channel kept growing, passing 700,000 subscribers and 433 million views. Bobby chartered across the Caribbean, sailed Greece, and took delivery of an Island Spirit 525E catamaran named Maverick. So what's the real tragedy no one talks about? The hidden tragedy. The tragedy isn't just the stroke, the hurricane, the fire, or the lost dogs, though each of those is devastating on its own. The real tragedy that no one talks about is the cost of chasing a dream in public. Bobby turned his life-changing stroke into motivation for a new life. Viewers see the beautiful sailing, the exotic locations, the adventure. What they don't always see is the isolation of being at sea, the relationship strain from constant filming, the financial pressure when boats cost fortunes to maintain, the mental toll of reading thousands of comments, both supportive and critical, and the guilt of monetizing personal tragedy. When Maverick died, Bobby didn't have the luxury of private grief. He documented it for his audience. When his relationship with Laura ended, it played out in front of hundreds of thousands of subscribers. When his boat caught fire and he was rescued by the Coast Guard, he turned it into content. This is the hidden cost of living your dream on YouTube. Every personal loss becomes public. Every setback is documented. Every disaster is monetized. Not because Bobby is callous, but because his livelihood depends on the channel continuing. The pressure to post weekly, to keep subscribers engaged, to maintain sponsor relationships, to keep the algorithm happy. It's relentless. Bobby has spoken about spending 40+ hours per week planning content, filming, and editing, all while also maintaining a boat and actually sailing it. That's more than a full-time job. It's an all-consuming commitment. Laura experienced this burnout firsthand, leading to their split. The constant work, the lack of true downtime, the pressure to always be creating, it's not sustainable for everyone. Yet Bobby has kept going for nearly a decade. Bobby's story reminds us that life can change in an instant, but those moments don't have to define the ending. Resilience isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up again and again. It also shows how much community matters and how every YouTube channel is just a highlight reel. Behind the sunsets are real losses, burnout, and pressure. Bobby didn't just lose boats, he lost privacy, relationships, and stability. Yet, he keeps going, refusing to let tragedy have the final word. That's the real story behind Sailing Doodles. So here's my question for you. What does Bobby's story teach you about resilience? Have you ever had a moment where everything flipped overnight and you had to rebuild from scratch? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them all, and I really want to hear your story. And if this video peeled back the curtain on the not-so-glamorous side of sailing life, do me a favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We're digging into the untold stories behind popular YouTube channels, and it's only getting juicier from here. If you want to support Bobby, check out Sailing Doodles. He's currently in Season 10 with his new catamaran, Maverick. After everything he's survived, he deserves the love. Thanks for watching. Remember, behind every perfect sunset is a real fight. See you on the next one.